Okay, so let's start off with kind of what the overall top few teams looks like, and then we'll dive into a few different questions and specifics and stuff. So with all those factors, who are the healthiest salary cap situations in the NFL?
I'll say the Bengals. They are first. They were first last year. I'm kind of shocked we're seeing a back-to-back number one overall in this, but of course we are probably going to see, Joe Burrow get a $55+ million per year contract in the next couple months. That will certainly change the equation here. But for them, look, third overall in the just valuation of their roster. They're not only talented, but they have a lot of good players at marquee positions, including quarterback, which obviously goes a very long way. They've been able to add talent without giving up much draft capital, top half of the NFL, in just a number of players that they have on rookie deals right now. And here's the big one probably, is they're still top 5 in cap space for the next 3 years. Again, that is going to change dramatically, but it looks good right now. Only 4th in total prorated money given out. So, those signing bonuses, all those things, again, going to change. But what it does, if you don't have it going into all these deals, is, look, you can do it. It's not a bugaboo to use these mechanisms at play. It's more just, if you're doing it all the time, it then gets hard to add more talent. The Buccaneers are my favorite example. They basically had no prorated money before Tom Brady got there, and it's why they were able to just push so much cap into the future. If they already had it, it would have made it really difficult to do that. So they're top 5 in that category as well. And then I mentioned the free agents kind of work against them, but that's expected.
So when you're looking at this, and Cincinnati is, the top team based off this kind of measurement, what is the driving force behind that? Is it a team that's just drafted well in recent years and therefore has a roster that has the likes of T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, and that type of player on it right now? Or is it a reflection of the contracts that are going to come due that we've been talking about, the same collection of players, and this team sort of understanding that they need to free up the space in order to make that happen, that they need to kind of create this situation where they have a lot of space and they have the kind of cash that they can then give out these contracts, which obviously will change that picture once all those deals are signed.
Yeah, drafting well is always going to be the greatest way you can, it sounds very, very simple and obvious, but it's a cure-all for everything. If you hit on a bunch of draft picks, you can figure the rest out later, and it really is the magic sauce to just creating a good football team and sustaining it for a period of time, because you have these surplus value 4-year deals. So that is, of course, number one, but for them, they deserve a ton of credit for when they have dipped their toes in the free agency waters. I mean, a couple guys I just mentioned that are now due for new deals, but, Chidobe Awuzie, you get him for less than $10 million a year. He played like a top 10 corner, when healthy in 2021. Trey Hendrickson, $15 million a year. He's played like a $25 million per year edge rusher since the day they signed him. DJ Reader has had injuries, but I think he signed for about $13.25 million per year. He's played for, at a value above that, even with the injuries, frankly. So they've also just signed a lot of very good players for good deals. Mike Hilton, and we can keep naming names as long as we want to go. Even Orlando Brown this offseason, that is he's worth more than what he got. He is. So it's the drafting very well. Obviously, they were picking super duper high. Higgins, Burrow, Chase, all these guys came from a class where they were picking top 5, but also when they supplemented this roster around those guys, they picked their spots. They signed kind of second wave free agents, and they just hit on a bunch of them.
Yeah, it's an interesting connection to make, that drafting well is one of the best things you can do for a healthy salary cap. It's not necessarily an intuitive connection, but because those contracts are such good value, the rookie deals that we all know, it's in some ways it's a just 2 + 2 = 4 kind of deal, but it was a connection that I hadn't necessarily made actively in my brain beforehand, that if you go on a run of drafting well, it's going to help your salary cap, because those are a bunch of players, at least short term, that are on those surplus value cheap deals. Okay, eventually in a few years you're going to have to pay them market value or above market value. But in the short term, that is going to dramatically help your salary cap, but only to a limit. And I think a good example of that is New Orleans, who have drafted kind of as well as anybody over, a period of time, but it's not enough to drag them up the list because of the way they play the salary cap versus a team like Cincinnati.
Here's the big thing for them. The kind of analogy I make, like I said, why drafting well can just be a cure for everything. So, of course, I get asked about them a ton. They are dead last in this ranking. I think they were last year as well. But they always get away with it. They always sign players. All right, from the 5-year period from 2012 to 2016, you had Drew Brees in his prime. You had a lot of good football players around the roster as well. But you make Jarris Byrd the highest paid safety in the NFL. You give Junior Galette a lot of money when he already kind of had some off-field stuff going on. You're giving out all these major contracts. From this 5-year period, they were 7-9 4 times, and they won 11 games 1 year. I think they won a playoff game that year. So one playoff win in a 5-year stretch with Drew Brees at quarterback. And he had the lowest passing yardage total in that 5 years was 4,870. He had 3 5,000-yard seasons in that stretch and basically had nothing to show for it. And then the 2017 draft class happens, right, and you add 4 like all-pro caliber players in one class at tackle, at edge rusher with Trey Hendrickson, obviously Marcus Williams, all these players. Yeah, it can solve a lot of problems, but if that class stinks, like our entire narrative and analysis around the Saints is probably different because they probably tear it down earlier. They're probably kind of in a different position right now. But hey, I mean, I'm not taking wholly in against them. They knocked it out of the park, and it kind of prolonged the Breeze era for probably 2-3 more years.
So who else would you highlight as teams that are in a particularly good situation in terms of cap health?
Yeah, so, I think just one example of somewhere where they did a good job of allowing themselves to do what they're now doing, that is the New York Jets, where we're going to get more and more teams that make these massive trades for, these elite quarterbacks if they're available. I mentioned Brady earlier. Obviously, that was a free agency signing, but I think you only can really pull that off in a sustainable manner if you have a lot of really good players on these cheap deals elsewhere. So, when you add Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner, Jermaine Johnson, Breece Hall last year, had a couple good picks in years before that as well. Obviously, some bad ones like Zach Wilson, but it essentially inheriting this massive contract for Aaron Rodgers doesn't kill them, right? Like they're still okay. They can still navigate through these waters. They added some talent. They had a lot of good players to begin with. They can now kind of add depth, and they're 5-6 edge rushers deep at this point. So, it shows that if you try to have a quick fix and spend a ton in free agency, which they did before, it's not always going to be the fastest path back. And frankly, more so, it might hinder your ability to get a big quarterback and be able to kind of do one of these things. So, yeah, they're fine. I mean, they should be in a good place for a couple more years.
In how many how much could that change depending on what happens with Aaron Rodgers, right? So I think the expectations year one are that Aaron Rodgers does well. The Jets are contenders. They make the playoffs. Maybe they go on a run. Maybe they make a Super Bowl. Maybe they win a Super Bowl. After that, though, feels like a total unknown, almost regardless of what happens. Like if it's a terrible season, could go in a number of ways. If they win a Super Bowl, it could go in a number of ways. Like Rodgers could go, this is awesome. Let's go again. Or he could walk away and be like, that's my validation, right? That's the second ring. That makes me untouchable. All the talk about, Rodgers can't get it done in the postseason, all that disappears. And he gets the sort of Eli Manning or Peyton Manning even validation of the second ring, which means nobody can criticize you anymore. And then he can walk off into the sunset. So there's a variety of sort of different things that could happen to Rodgers. How many different ways does that affect that salary cap situation for them?
Yeah, so right now he has a salary in 2024 of over $100 million. It's probably the biggest salary on paper in the history of the NFL. Obviously, he's going to shift a chunk of that into this year. And Jeremy Fowler at ESPN has been talking about how they're trying to kind of work through how to make this a 2-year pact. Like you said, I think if he wins the Super Bowl and wants to retire, they'd probably be okay with that. If anything, they can find a way to spin that as a positive, right? Because, okay, well, we're not paying him $55 million next year. Of course, you got to find a quarterback and figure that whole situation out. But, he doesn't cripple them long term. It's just obviously you got to pay Quinnen Williams. There are a lot of good players coming up for deals, but you look at that roster, they don't have any kind of bloated veteran contracts that are working against them that are going to be super tough to get off of. If anything, this offseason, they did a good job of negotiating a pay cut with Carl Lawson. I think they're trying to negotiate a pay cut with CJ Mosley. They're trying to actually get out ahead of it. And Joe Douglas has always done that. People say, they have so much cap space. Why are they, asking guys for pay cuts? every dollar saved in cash matters and could come down, later on could factor in. And they've kind of been setting this up for a couple of years now. Yeah, whatever Rodgers does, they are fine to work around what he wants to do.